درود بر بینندگان عزیز تلویزیون ملی ایران. مهمان امروز ما آقای دکتر جسر هستند و یکی از متخصصین هستند و کسانی هستند که در امور سوریه و مسائل تروریستی برای شما معرفیشون میکنیم. الان روی خط منتظر نمیخوایم نگه داریم ایشونو و خواهش میکنم توجه کنید به مسائلی که داریم با ایشون در میون میذاریم. Welcome to NITV, Dr. Jasser.
It's nice to be with you. Thanks for having me.
I understand you have a background as a U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander, President of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and leading medical doctor in your field. Please tell our audience about the American Islamic Forum for Democracy mission.
We are a group of American citizens formed our organization and basically a tactic, and that ultimately there's a radicalization process that only Muslims can counter and Muslims need to lead, and that ultimately the fuel for militant Islamism or terrorism was the ideology of political Islam and its sense of supremacy over Western societies. So we formed the American Islamic Forum for Democracy with a very simple mission, which is to separate mosque and state within the Muslim community, that we as devout Muslims that love our faith can believe in a strong faith, no different than the founding fathers of America did, and we felt that by separating that mosque and state, we can ultimately defeat the spread of radical Islam around the world by defeating the fuel, which is political Islam. And since 9/11, we've been growing. We've developed youth projects for teaching the principles of liberty and freedom, and working to build a movement counter theocratic Islam.
Recently, you participated in a hearing on Capitol Hill concerning Syria, challenge for the opposition and the support needed for change there. The Iranian community, our audience, is very supportive of the Syrian people, as we would both like to see the changes in our countries. How do you see the Syria's role in Middle East, volatility with regards to its relationship to Iran and terrorism?
That's a great question, because this is, there have been so many of us that our families escaped the Middle East and escaped Syria. My family came here in the mid-60s, escaping the Ba'athist regime and ultimately Hafiz Assad's dictatorship, and which was one of the worst regimes in the Middle East, and probably since World War II. We formed a separate group called Save Syria Now that I'm one of the founding members of, and it includes a number of Syrian Americans across the country that have come together to try to get the American administration to formulate its foreign policy in a way that can help the opposition in Syria, to help expose the human rights violations that are happening, and continue the momentum that the courageous people of Syria have been pushing forth in since they began their uprisings in March. And the uprisings, really, I can't express enough to you how courageous these people are, because Syria has been a basically iron-fisted rule in the past 40-plus years, 30 years under Hafiz, and now 11 years under Bashar. And this thug and his henchmen have run a government that has imprisoned any opposition, tortured people, massacres individuals that speak out against them. We've seen people that have been shot in cold blood. There have been over 1,600 killed since the uprisings began, and over 10 to 15,000 in prison, with almost 20,000 escaping as refugees to Turkey. So we're trying to wake up the West, and I can't tell you how much American security would benefit from seeing a change in Syria, because of the avenue and the relationship between Syria and Iran, and the Iranian regime in funding Hezbollah and trying to get control in the region against the rest of the powers that be in the Middle East.
Inside Syria, are there some demonstration who call for reform, while others seek regime change? This is the same thing that happened, but for Iranian was one day. Some people came for the reform, then when they started to just kill them or take them and torture them, then all the Iranians came and they said, do we want to change the regime? What do you think about it? Is it really going to change the regime, or most of the people they are, because you know there's a lot of things we are worried about it. If it's just they stay in power, little by little, they're going to get the power again and do the same thing they did in that years that you said, and that's correct what you told us. What do you think, that will be the regime change in Syria, people what they want, or they want to reform in Syria?
Well, I don't think you can reform. There is no piece or ounce of truth that ever would come out of the government of this regime. So talk about reform, it's all lies. I think as far as what could be the tipping point in changing Syria, there's one of two things that are going to happen. You know, what happens is in Syria is just such an oppressive regime, I don't think that people will return to their homes, because ultimately if they do go back, they will then be massacred over the next year. Anybody that spoke out, anybody that did anything, the intelligence services, the police forces will make sure that they're punished, and their siblings and their cousins are all punished so that it never happens again. So the people are not going to return to their homes. There's one of two things that are going to happen. Either there becomes a complete economic collapse of Syria, and we were waiting for Aleppo and especially Damascus. Those are the main economic centers in Syria that have not woken up yet, because they stand to lose the most economically. But once they wake up, and they are starting to have some days in which they are starting to have some uprisings there and demonstrations, we're starting to see even more tipping that way. But ultimately, when the military henchmen can no longer get money, can no longer get a paycheck, you will see a change in Syria, and the regime will collapse. The other thing would be coup happened, where you have, you know, maybe there's some honest, there have been some, you know, over of the 1,800 people killed, over 200 of them were military people that refused to shoot on innocent civilians. So there may be a tipping point in which certain members of the military decide to oust the Assad family, take them under arrest, and imprison them, and change the government, and give the government back to its people. That's less likely, because the Assad regime has been very systematic in filtering out and murdering people within the military that were not ideologically in key with the fascists that are currently running the Assad regime. So it's either going to be economic or it's going to be military coup. I think this is why we've been moving for the American administration to really begin to up the ante as far as economic sanctions. There are companies from the Dutch, Germany, Italy that are making still significant money in Syria, and if they started to pull out operations, you would start to see a significant collapse. Petrodollars, 1/3 of the Syrian economy is petrodollars. If we had a complete isolation of that and nobody bought Syrian crude oil anymore, I think you would find that affects the money that the Assad family is getting. And I think ultimately we need to do everything possible to freeze any of the assets that any of the members of the military leadership and Assad family have in Europe or elsewhere, including Assad's wife in London. They haven't frozen her assets, and I'm sure they may be using that to shelter some of their funds.
What do you think about what's the role of the Muslim Brotherhood, Akhwan al-Muslimin? And sometimes we hear it that sometimes, maybe I'm not right, but I see it, Akhwan al-Muslimin is going to say that no, we won't be the politician, we don't want to be the terrorists or something. What will be the role of them? What will be the future in Akhwan al-Muslimin in that part of the world?
That is a question, because this is why we formed our group Save Syria Now. Is we not only are concerned about putting an end and creating a system that will create the demise of the Assad regime, but we also want to make sure that American foreign policy is geared towards helping the right opposition, not all opposition, the right opposition. And the Brotherhood right now, as we saw in Egypt and elsewhere, is one of the groups that's the most organized. Now, would they take over Syria? I don't think so, because Syria is one of the most diverse countries in the Middle East. And you'll find not only is it 60% Sunni Muslim, you have 15 to 20% Kurdish, you've got Alawites and Druze and Christians and Jews. So there's a hugely diverse population. So of the Sunni Muslims, you know, barely a plurality are going to side with the Brotherhood. So you've got the Brotherhood that's a minority. Now the question is how soon, if the Assad able to be exited out of that? How soon would they have elections? If you have them too quickly, then the Brotherhood could walk in, and that may be what we're seeing in Egypt. But if you have it slowly, methodically, you have UN monitors, and you give the opposition a year, 6 months to a year, if not more, to organize and create. Remember, Syria's been frozen in time for the past 40-plus years. And before they went into this dictatorship, they had 19 different changes of government in the late 40s and 50s. So they still were getting their legs, exercised as far as understanding how to create a stable democracy. Now, having ossified for 40-plus years, that's going to need to be reinvigorated and learn a system that's not based on corruption and thuggery. So that needs time, but the Brotherhood is a definite concern for many of us anti-Islamists in the work we're doing, and we have to be careful that our government in the U.S. doesn't give the Brotherhood a leg up and give them the support, because we don't want to make them illegal because it's going to be a democracy, but we also should not support them and facilitate their rise.
How do you envision the Syrian people could be liberated? Is there a resolve to this crisis or not? Hello? 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 Hello?
It got cut off right before your last question.
I will ask you.
About,
how do you envision Syrian people could be liberated? Is there the resolve of this crisis? Hello?
Yeah, that's a great question as far as the Syrian liberation. Liberation has a number of steps involved. The first step is obviously getting rid of the dictator Assad. So that's going to have to be the first step, is continue the uprisings, continue until this regime is broken and the military. Remember, Syria is not happening like Egypt, because in Egypt there was not a consolidation as much of military, intelligence, and police force. Those were three different agencies. In Syria, those were all consolidated into one group, one family, basically, and that comes from one sect. So in Syria it's much more difficult, but ultimately, once they're able to continue the uprising and break the back of this regime, it may end up being bloody. It may end up needing a more military-type approach to it. Now, I don't know how they do it, because many of the Syrians don't. Most of the innocent Syrians do not have weapons to fight back. But ultimately, once the regime is broken, I think it's going to happen economically. Once that happens and they start having mass resignations from the military, then we're going to need some time in which they can begin to build institutions, because liberty is not just something based on getting rid of thugs and dictators, but it also involves understanding how to interact, understanding democracy, understanding and dealing with each other honestly, because right now, remember, corruption and graft is a huge part of how that system and society has operated. So you need to clean out those that have been leading based on corruption and bribery and begin to have a system based on honesty, pluralism, equal access to government, equal access to media. And I think that's going to be a big part of it, is as you begin to see newspapers, more media access and transparency, that will be a huge step towards modernizing and bringing Syria into the 20th, let alone the 21st century, so that they can begin to create a free society. And I think it's amazing, as much as Syria may be small, I do believe that if it becomes liberated, it will have a huge impact on Iran and begin to empower the Iranian people to step up again and have their summer like they did last summer, and begin to speak for freedom in their own country too.
You mentioned it. I don't want to now, but I hope in future we're going to talk about Iran more. But you know, Iranian came to in the street, didn't have a lot of the support for the free world. Anyhow, before we let you go, tell us about the American Islamic Leadership Coalition and the National Strategy Counterterrorism. What are some of the key recommendations that this Muslim organization is recommending to the Obama administration?
Yeah, I can't tell you how important that is. And you know, you're right. The free world needs to stand for principles, by the way, and it took them a while with Syria. They still haven't done so. Iran, they abandoned the freedom activists, and I do look forward to talking to you more about that. As far as the counterterrorism strategy, the Obama administration and John Brennan put forth what they called their counterterrorism strategy. And it was very narrow. It basically talked about Al-Qaeda as if, you know, militant Islamism is only Al-Qaeda. That's it, period, full stop. And that's just not true. They're simply one part of a symptom of an underlying disease of theocratic militant Islamism that has many permutations. And our American Islamic Leadership Coalition, that includes over 25 Muslim reform-minded, Western secular-minded organizations and leaders like our group, the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, came together and prepared a white paper that's about 8 pages. It's at our website, AmericanIslamicLeadership.org. We prepared this white paper and said, this is what the administration should have said. They should have been clear. Instead of just saying ideology, they should have said militant Islamism, identified political Islam as the root cause. They should have created a clear mechanism to say that, you know what, this ideology is spreading across the world because of cyber jihad and the use of the internet. They didn't identify the internet as any part of that solution. Third, they mentioned in their strategy, the Obama administration, about engaging with Muslim communities, diverse communities, but they didn't say who. And this, again, like we were talking about Syria, you can't just say that, well, we're going to engage with all communities. You have to identify that you're working with those that are anti-Islamists, that are looking at reform, and not the Islamist groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations that are regular on Press TV and other, you know, mechanisms. But they have to engage with liberty-minded, free-minded groups that are non-brotherhood legacy groups, and they've not identified. And that's really, I think, important, because we basically say as a coalition that this is a Muslim problem that needs a Muslim solution, and we as devout Muslims want to fix the problem. But we can't do it if they continue to listen to the Saudi interests, the Brotherhood groups, and the Salafists that have dominated the representation of Muslims in America.
Dr. Jasser, thank you very much. I'm sorry we had a problem with all the connection that we have. I hope that as soon as possible we're going to talk about Iran more, and we have to, all of us as American, I am like you. We had living in my country, then they came and they took over, and they killing every day, they torturing everybody in name of Islam. And we have to make clear for all the Islamic people that this is not right. And we have to support the people, and I hope the Obama administration take it really seriously and help to solve this problem, because will be a lot of the problem that now we have. The war, we cannot go war all over the world, but we have to have a clear policy and help the people really help the people that are fighting for liberty, for freedom. And I hope that all of us, we work together and we find a solution for this and help the Iranian people and Syrian, all the people in the world. And I thank you for what you're doing. I hope that we talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thank you, because this is just so important that people see that we want to be part of the solution and we don't want our societies to be taken over by Islamists, theocrats, and trade one fascist for another, and that we come together as a diverse community. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Bye bye. دوستان عزیز، مسائلی که وجود داره که بعضی ها این راه رو میرن که به خاطر کارهایی که به نام دین میکنن، حالا به خاطر به نام اسلام یا هر چیز دیگه ای، آنچه که مهم است نمیشه هیچ کس بتونه دین کسی رو برای همیشه یا اصلا نابود کنه، اما باید مشخص کرد و به عقیده من باید خود آنهایی که واقعا دین رو به عنوان یک چیز روحی برای خدای خودشون میدونن، اینها رو از اون گروه های تندرو و هر دینی جدا کرد. و در اینجا دنیا داره کوچکتر میشه. میبینید واقعا دیگه اون صورت مرزها داره از بعضی کشورها برداشته میشه و همه مسائل جهانی اگر پرابلم و گرفتاری در یک منطقه شروع بشه، به همسایه ها اول اثر میذاره، به منطقه اثر میذاره و بعد در تمام دنیا. نمونهش کشور خود ما در ایران وقتی که حکومتی آمد و همه دنیا ازش حمایت میکردن، مرد خدا بود خمینی، مرد خدا بود فلان، ولی دیدید که تمام کسانی که اومدن چه جنایاتی کردن با ملت ایران به اسم اسلام. و الان من در زندگی 69 سالگی خودم هیچ وقت مردم ایرانی رو، مسلمانان ایرانی رو ندیدم که اینقدر نفرت داشته باشن و اینقدر زیاد نفرت دارن، ناراحت شدن که تا حتی از دین اسلام هم متنفر شدن. و این درست نیست که ماها بشینیم در اینجا و به همدیگه کمک نمی کنیم. روی این اصل من خیلی خوشحالم که میتونیم تمام افراد مختلفی رو که دارن در تمام دنیا فعالیت میکنن. آقای دکتر جاسر، شما در اولین بار تلویزیون ایرانی میبینید، امیدوارم بتونه در تلویزیون‌های دیگه ایرانی هم باشه، ولی شما نگاه کنید در CNN هست، در فاکس هست، در تمام تلویزیون‌های دیگه هست. دلیل این که دعوت من و نوعی رو میپذیرن به خاطر من نیست، به خاطر مسئله ایرانه. و بعد هم ما میایم راهی رو میریم و دلمون میخواد که افراد مختلف که در دنیا و در آمریکا نفوذ دارن و هستن و دارن فعالیت میکنن، ما تو جامعه خودمون فقط اینا رو بتونیم بشناسیم و ببینیم کنار همدیگه میتونیم چه کمکی بکنیم به ملت ایران که هر روز کشته میشن و فاجعه پشت فاجعه میشه. ولی میبینید که از خود رژیم، کسانی که با رژیم بودن دیگه، من فکر میکنم شجاعتر از ماهایی که در خارج بودیم دارن بلند میشن. و این زمان بیداری است، زمان آن جایی است که باید همه ما کنار هم بایستیم. هر روز این رو خواهم گفت تا نفس دارم، تا ببینم کی کنار هم میایستیم. اجازه بدید برنامه امروز من خیلی کوتاه تموم کنم، برای اینکه بسیار ما کارهای زیادی داریم و اجازه بدید که من گفتار برنامه هام رو به این صورت خدمتتون بگم و شاید در هفته روزهای یک شنبه برنامه زنده بگذاریم که گفتمانی خودمون با هم داشته باشیم. منو ببخشید اگر تلفن ها رو باز نمی کنم، برای اینکه فکر میکنم تلویزیون های عزیز دیگه هستن که با شما تلفنی صحبت میکنن و شما در دلتون میکنید، ولی میدونم خیلی ها فشار میارید که میخواید گاهی وقتا بیاید صحبت کنید. بگذارید ببینید حال من یه خورده بهتر میشه. دوستان ما خیلی فشار روشون کم زیاده، بودجه کمی که ما داریم و نمیتونیم هفته 7 روز من از بچه‌ها کار بکشم. و اجازه بدید به زودی روزهای یک شنبه برنامه زنده رو خواهیم گذاشت. من ازتون خداحافظی میکنم تا روز دوشنبه. زنده باد ایران، زنده باد آزادی.